And welcome back. I am the database guy. As you know, I've been doing these videos for you at no cost to you. They're free. We're talking about MS Access SQL Server Database Development course, and in our course, we are at Presentation 4, Video 1. There will obviously be more than one video based on this presentation, so we may have as many as 3. But we're at the 4th bullet point of tables. We're finally into tables, but we're going to start, as they say, crawl before we walk. So we're going to learn about types of data types in tables, keys, primary and foreign, and of course relationships. You have a one-to-many, a one-to-one, and a many-to-many. Now, in the data types, what you must understand, if you can see this, is that text used to be a data type in the old Access. It's now been replaced by short text. So that text can be up to 255 characters, and again, that is the full in terms of how many bits in a byte, right? So that's full hexadecimal. That's 2 to the 0 plus 2 to the 1 up to 2 to the 8th, which would give you 255. It's no accident, but it is that. Memo was the old field that used to be there, which was now replaced by long text. So you have either a short text or a long text. A long text, as you can see here, can be up to 63,999 characters long, very long. I would be sparing with that long text. I really, really would. Because it's nice to have that kind of a field, but the more data you put into it, the harder it will be to search through it. Just a little thing there. You can still search, but it's going to be tricky when you have a lot of information there. And then our number field is used in mathematical calculations. You can have 1, 2, 4, or 8 bytes, and 16 bytes if the field size is properly set. I'm sorry, is set to replication ID. We're not worried about the 16 bytes, but generally you're going to pick the number field, and unless you need more data to be supported by it, large numbers, you'll probably stick with the smaller number of bytes. Okay. So date and time, date time values from the year 100 through 999. I can tell you right now that this probably will never be an issue for you, but you can format the date and the time. We can show you how to do that in a demo in our second video, not this video. I'm giving you a lot of information as this. That size is 8 bytes. So just by the way, to go back to the number field, 8 bytes is probably what you want to use unless you have a small amount of data. Currency, that's also 8 byte in size. Pardon me. Currency values are numeric data used in mathematical calculations, and you can set that currency in terms of globally to whatever you want. So you could have pounds, or you could have euro, or something like that. Uh, it's nice to have that. Now the auto number, this is a 4 byte, and again, could be set to 16 if you're using replication ID, but this is 4 bytes. It's very small. So it's a unique sequential number, and you saw this in a previous video. It increments every number as it goes. So each entry from 1 to all the way up to as high as you can imagine and within the 4 byte limit, it will increment those numbers. Now, if you delete a line where an auto ID is in, and you saw this, so I don't know if you did see it, maybe I did show it to you. So if I enter lines 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I delete line 3, when I go to enter a new line in, I will not get 3 back ever again. I will get 5 as the next sequential number. And that's why it does that. Now, this is why deleting data is not exactly acceptable, something we want to do. However, it could be done. So the auto number is nice, and the auto number we're going to see is used in something called the primary key. It's typically an identifier that identifies an entire record of data, and with that, um, it it has no intrinsic relationship to the data, but it identifies it, connects it. And you're going to see how this plays out into a foreign key as well. The yes and no field that contains only one of two values, a yes, no, true, false, or on, off, is a bit. Now, by the way, and these values in SQL Server and SQL Express, they're the same in terms of SQL Server and SQL Express, but they differ from what you see in Microsoft Access. These are the data types in Access, okay? And in SQL Server, you will see it that yes, no, not a yes, no, but it's called a bit because it's the same thing, essentially. And you don't have, you do have an auto number. You can have an auto number in SQL Server, and you can have date, time, and other things. We'll show you that at a later date. Um, so you can see that in SQL Server. All right, so OLE object, this is a dangerous one because this could be any kind of file, an object that's a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or an image or anything you can think of. You can put up to a gigabyte, but I'm going to forewarn you about the OLE because it takes up a lot of space. It really does. And you got to be careful with it. I think the best example of the OLE that I've used is when I'm creating custom ribbons. I store images. Well, they're not even as OLEs. We'll get to that in a minute, but you could do it as an OLE. And that again would take up a certain amount of space. That's one good use of it. Then you have hyperlink. Now, hyperlink to me, and you can use it. You know what that is. It's a combination of text and numbers. And when you click on it, it brings you out to a web page or some other kind of connection to the internet. Um, each part of the path of a hyperlink data type can contain up to 2048 characters. Is that an accident? No, that's also right because you know that after 250, well, after 256, you have what is it? 512, and then you have 1024, and then 2048. So it has something to do with that hexadecimal as well. Attachment, and this is one where I just brought up the I'm sorry, uh, oh boy, the ribbon, the custom ribbon. All the images I used were attachments, and they're a little bit less and a little bit easier to work with. It's just any supported type of file can be made as an attachment. But you got to be careful in how to use these because, again, you're not going to be able to search through either an OLE or an attachment, but you will be able to open it up if you need to see something. All right. Now, there are two others I'm not going to get into, which have no real use in the real world. They're old, they're antiquated parts of Access that will probably eventually go away. Okay, let's look at keys. A primary key, and you saw this in one of my earlier demonstrations. A primary key is a field or a set of fields with values that are unique throughout a table. Values of the key can be used to refer to entire records because each record has a different value for the key. Each table can have only one primary key. Um, that is true. You can only have one primary key. Now in SQL Server, believe it or not, you can have more than one. Um, and I've seen this with a client's work. And it really was disturbing to me because it sort of restricted data that would go in. So, but let's look at a primary key. We talked about auto number being a primary key, and certainly it can. It has no intrinsic value. It has no relationship to data. Let's look at other possibilities of primary keys. We go to our books database, the ISBN. Each book has a unique ISBN, which could be a primary key. Another one, if you're dealing with hospital data, it's not something you got to be careful with this. But a social security number is a unique number. No two people have the same SS number, but you really wouldn't want to have that as a number which to search for somebody, but you could. You would have to have that masked as you typed it in for HIPAA reasons because you want to make sure there's privacy and other reasons. So that could be one. You might have a primary key might be, let's see. An inventory number, a primary key might be an invoice number. You can think of a lot of primary keys, things we use every single day, that would be something like that. And it would be issued in such a way, which by the way, you can do this. You can issue a primary key in a certain pattern or mask, and you'll see that. So in other words, if your company has invoices, it might be INV. Let's say your company initials would be C5 and or company 5 or whatever it is, and then a number after that, a sequential number. Um, could be an invoice number. Now, is that an auto number? No. What you would do would be you would create that sequential number and you would only commit it and be sure it doesn't exist. Um, or you would create the, no, I could take that back. You'd create that sequential number and you would use a temp table where the individual would fill out all the information for the invoice. And what would happen would be anybody now going into that um, to do another invoice, you would then have, you could set up a system where the next number would be assigned and so on. But uh, there are ways, and I've done this in industry and in database work where I can be assured that um, somebody creating an invoice would, I did this for a client recently, would create the invoice and once it committed it, which is really seconds from doing it and saving it in the main table, then whoever has the database open now would open up the next invoice number. So you just got to be sure that the way it's done doesn't create two of the same invoice numbers because you can't do that. You would then have an issue where it would say you cannot save the record. It needs a unique number. So you just got to be careful. We'll go through that at some point and show you an example of that. I will. So a primary key could be an auto number, or it could be a regular, an auto number, or an auto set of characters and numbers, or not, I'm sorry, or a set of characters and numbers, or it could be something that is generated each time you need it, and it's sort of an auto number kind of style. Uh, so yeah, and that works out pretty well. Um, But again, it doesn't have to be an auto number. It could be a characters, which really would be what we would be talking about. So if I use a social security number, I would put that as characters, not as numbers, and I would have a mask in there. If I were using that as an invoice number, I would do the same thing, some sort of mask in the characters. And if I were doing an ISBN, similar as well. So it doesn't have to be an auto number. Most parts you're going to see that primary keys are auto numbers for the reason on the second point here, the foreign key. Now, a foreign key is a field in one table that references the primary key in another table, and foreign keys establish relationships between tables and ensure that data in one table corresponds to valid entries in another. And so what we're saying here is simple, and I think I showed you this in the previous video, that if you were to select a publisher, you're automatically selecting that primary key because it's tied to it. But the user doesn't realize that in the front end. They're just selecting the publisher. Well, the same thing can happen too for selecting a client or a customer or a book or now with an invoice, there's where you'd actually be selecting the invoice number. Okay. Or, if you want to see all invoices from a customer, you select the customer and have a link to all the customer's invoices, but we're not talking about that. If we were really selecting an invoice number, then you would link to a customer's order. And so all of this is connected to the idea that, and that you will have basically when I have a foreign key in one table, and the example was the books table, and the foreign key was for publishers, that would mean that I could look at the publishers table and see every book that they published, that each publisher published or was part of it. I could make a better connection with data and flow of data. Without that foreign key, I have to do a searching that is, first of all, laborious, and secondly, I kill my normality. And we talk about normality, would have a lot of replication of that publisher's name, and that would be crazy. So a foreign key is very important because it connects tables. Okay. Now the relationships to one-to-many is the big one you're going to see. You take the primary key on one side and add its additional field or fields to the table on the many side. For example, you add a new field, the ID field from customers table to the orders table and name it customer's ID. Access and then use the customer ID in the orders table to locate the correct customer for each order. Well, this is the same thing when we go back for the books, right? So I can use the publisher ID to locate the correct publisher to each book. And that's the whole point of that. All right. It also ensures that you have a very solid normalization going on. And the reason why it's a one to many, again, one book can have, or one publisher can have many books. Now, can one book have many publishers? No. I mean, you generally, a book is published by one. But if you go on looking at the author side of it, one book can have many authors, and an author can publish many books. We're going to get to that one in a moment. That's a whole different thing. The one-to-one is each record in the first table can only have one matching record in the second table, and each record in the second table can only have one matching record in the first table. It's not a common relationship. Most often, the information related in this way is stored in the same table. You might use a one-to-one relationship to divide a table with many fields to isolate part of the table for security reasons or to store information. That applies only to a subset of the main table. Okay, so um, that's really really important on that. I haven't used one-to-one relationships almost at all. I can't think of in my 17 years if I've ever used a one-to-one. It's just something that, as they're pointing out here, it's probably on the same table. I think an example of a one-to-one, the best one that I can provide for you is, for example, you have employees and then you have the employee's location or their room, whatever you want to call it. That could be in a separate table, and the reason being is, um, but again, that would be more of a one-to-many. It really would. Um, so I think about it, and it could be a one-to-one though, because you could store that in a separate table and not have a one-to-many. But it's a very rare type of relationship. All right, now our last one, a many-to-many. And here's what I talked about with the authors. So you need a third table called the junction table that breaks down the many-to-many into two one-to-many relationships. So if we take that idea, and you're going to see this in the example in video 2 of presentation 4 on tables, I have a books table. And in the books I have an authors table. Now I could relate them as a one-to-many. I could say one book has many authors. But one issue with that is that one author can write many books. I can't go back the other way. And that's the challenge there. So I can't connect those tables, even if I want to. I really can't. Um, in a sense, I could, but what happens is, let's say the Moby Dick, right? And I have Herman Melville as my author. And then I have another book written by Melville as well as the author, okay? And I have somebody else on that book as an author as well, right? Um, one of the issues is I'm setting up the foreign key in my books table. And so that foreign key is going to point to one author. And so if I set the foreign key up in the author's table for the book ID, all right, what it means is that I will now be able to find all the authors for given books in the books table, all right? So I'm saying that I have a one-to-many and that the one book can have many different authors, but that's really not true, right? I could pick up 3 authors and put the same book ID in. That way, I could do it, or just one author if I wanted to. However, this is not a good flexible way to do this because it's restrictive. As I said, in the other way around, if I put a foreign key in the authors, in the books table, rather, in the authors table, rather, I'm sorry, and that foreign key is to the book ID, it means I have to locate every book for a given author. If I go the other way around and put the author ID in the books table, it's a little bit easier. I certainly can link the author, pick the author out that I want for the given book, no problem, but I can only pick one. So what do? You need a third junction table. So you have the books table, you have the authors table, and you need the books authors table. And essentially in that table, you're not going to have a primary key. There is no primary key. It's a junction table. So what you do is you take the primary key from the books table, you put the foreign key into the books authors table, and there is your one-to-many there. And you take the primary key from the authors table and you make it a foreign key in the books authors table, and there you go there. Now your question will be, wait a second. I've got to have an existing author and an existing book to enter data in that book authors table. The answer is yes, you do. But how it's done is quite interesting in the graphic user interface, and you're going to see this. What will happen will be once you select a book and it gets a number, let's say the ISBN, when you go to add authors, that ISBN will automatically be populated as the foreign key for the book ID, behind the scenes, unknown to the end user. All the end user will have to do is select authors, as many as they want, and those author IDs, again, you're selecting the author, not the ID. The author IDs will be populated, and the user can look at that and say, well, I want to delete one or add another until they're satisfied. And then what they do is when they commit this to save it, right, then what will happen is it will store that data in the book's authors table. And so what you have is, because you have many books and many authors, and they're connected by the junction table, you have a many-to-many. And that table will be shown as indeterminate. And you'll see that in our presentation for video, probably too. So we'll actually put these into action so you can see what they look like, and we can see the different types of data types. So my idea here is to take this, what I'm showing you today, and bring it into, I'm sorry, yeah, bring it into an actual demo in our video too. So stick with me, please. And again, I hope I'm not going too fast. If there's something you don't understand, you can always email me or contact me. I am getting or have a Facebook page ready to go, which I'm going to post. But the next thing is to see these things in action in an actual database in Microsoft Access. Now, a final thought on this. Do you have a primary key in SQL Server? Certainly do, and you can have more than one. I've seen it. You have a foreign key? Absolutely. Do you have these relationships? You do. One to many, almost always. One to one, rarely if ever. And the indeterminate is really two one-to-manys to a third table, so you can certainly have that. The data types vary or are slightly different in SQL Server, and I think I'm going to show you some of those as well. All right, a little bit of it so you can see them, but I don't know when. I may have to wait till the end of this, the last video in this presentation. So, I am the database guy, wherever you are. Good night, good evening, good morning, good day. Keep it here. Like and subscribe. As always, Have a great day.